Okay, great. Okay, welcome again. Happy World Oceans Day from Sharks for Kids and the rest of the team. Give you guys a heads up. I'm Duncan Brake. I'm the media director of Sharks for Kids. Gillian is going to be joining us in a little bit, jumping on to finish off the session. And we have, again, wonderful Dr. Julius Csotonyi, who is here today to show us how to illustrate an amazing critter. Very, very cool Sharky. There's a bunch of these available online already that you can go back. So see how you do with this one. Go onto the Sharks for Kids YouTube channel and maybe go and have a go at one of the other ones too. We'll also be recording this session too, and then we'll post it in a day or so, depending on the internet speed and how many people are watching Netflix out there. If you want to go back and draw or take a little bit more time in the drawing, you can review that process as well. So Julius is an amazing illustrator. He's also a pretty brainy scientist as well. And if you see some of his works of art, he doesn't always just do sharks. He does all sorts of nature. He's brought dinosaurs to life as well. But we definitely like all his sharky pictures. So I will hand over to you and let you take over, buddy.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Duncan. Sounds okay on your end?
Yeah, sounds perfect.
Great. Awesome. Well, thank you very much for that wonderful intro. And yeah, I think we should have some fun today with this shark. Oh, by the way, the shark in the background there, I've got there, you can probably recognize that as a black-tip reef shark. It's actually the very first shark that I snorkeled with last year. So that was like my really, really happy moment, having seen this shark in the wild for the very, very first time. So that was nice. So yeah, so today is World Oceans Day. So happy World Oceans Day to everybody. I guess every day should be World Oceans Day. It would be really good. We should keep that in our minds and then do our best to take care of the ocean. And one of the ways we can do that is to help everybody find out more about the ocean and about the wonderful life that lives there. And so that's kind of part of why I do these kinds of online drawing sessions as well. And many thanks to Sharks for Kids for having me on their webinar series for this. So without further ado, how about we start with drawing this week's shark. And I wonder if anybody's been figuring out what species we might be working on. And we are going to actually draw a very large shark. Now, I wanted to pick one that was kind of a good one for World Oceans Day, one that kind of showed us that the ocean is this wonderfully big place with a lot left still to discover. And what better way to do that in some ways than to show an example of a shark that was discovered relatively recently, but it is very surprising that it has been missed for so many years before that. And the shark we're talking about now is the Megamouth shark, or the Megachasma plagios, the scientific name. And so this is a really neat shark because it was discovered in 1976, so that's relatively recent. But it's a shark that's like something like over 5 meters long, or over 15 feet long, up to sometimes even a bit more than that. So it's really amazing that that was missed for all that time until 1976, and now still relatively little is known about it. But we've got quite a few nice photos of it out there now. And so I've looked at a lot of different photos of this animal, and I'd like to bring together some of the information about it to make it fun to draw. And there's a lot of artwork out there of this one, and not all of it gets some of these key points about its anatomy. And so I'd like to call attention to some of those special bits of its anatomy, because it's a really weird, wonky looking shark. So let's get started with that one. Aha, there we go.
Perfect. All right.
Yay.
Well, thank you to everyone who hung in there. Sorry, we've been pretty lucky with the tech, but you know what? Sometimes I don't know. It's a Monday, maybe.
That's right. There you go.
We'll just say it's Monday. Sure.
that works absolutely.
All
Yeah.
right.
Well,
I'm going to let you take over if you want to just finish your answer to that question and then get drawing.
I think that pretty much does it. That was it. So it was a combination of interesting things coming together like that, and so it kind of, in a sense, it fell in my lap that way, and then I kind of took advantage of the opportunity.
Amazing when something you're super passionate about and you love doing, you can actually make a living. So
yeah, that's rare, and I'm really happy and grateful for that.
Oh, good.
Awesome.
All right, I've got my pencil as well. I'm gonna sign off my video, but I'll see you back at the end, and
Sounds great.
Get drawing.
Awesome. So Megamouth Monday it is.
All right.
Okay, good. Well, here we go. And so what I've done is set it up. I'm going to be doing this like before using a digital, well, it sort of vanishes, a tablet and stylus, which is kind of like my paper and pencil. But if you want to, you can use whatever works for you. And I've set up my digital workspace to mimic an 8.5 by 11 inch paper. And so it works really well if you're using just a regular letter size page or something like close to that. So what I want you to do first is, if you have a lighter colored pencil or a lighter marking pencil, choose that one first, or make light lines, because the first thing we're going to do is set up some guide shapes to make sure that we get the proportions right. And then we'll add the details in afterwards. And those details we're going to put into heavier lines in the end, or darker lines if you have different colors. So keep that in mind. I'm going to show that by using a red colored marker or digital marker first that looks like this. And then afterwards, I'm going to shift for the details to black, so you'll be able to tell the difference in the lines that I'm making. So with that, let's get started drawing this Megamouth. So this is a really weird shark with a really strange shape overall, strange shaped body, strange shaped head, and a mouth that's really, really unusual and interesting. And so, yeah, so this is an example of a shark that was discovered relatively recently, even though it's very large. It's like 15 to 20 feet long, but yet it was only discovered in 1976. So what we're going to do is start out with the head of the animal, and this is going to be just sort of a guide shape. You're going to go to the lower left side of your page and make kind of an oval shape, because, whoops, here, I'm going to set I start in red. Let's keep my promise with that. So yeah, as you can tell, all sharks are composed of ovals and nacho shapes and bananas and circles and such when you're dealing with meat, it seems. So it makes sort of an oval. Whoops, that's kind of a wonky oval. Well, you know, at close, something like that, roughly oval shape like this, or maybe like a potato. You could call it a potato shape as well. That's where we're going to set up the head of the shark. And the reason is because it's going to be swimming down towards the left. Swimming down because this kind of also represents the fact that it's a deep water shark. It lives anywhere between maybe 100 to 200 meters, or about 300 to 600 feet below the surface a lot of the time, maybe even deeper. And in the daytime, it spends time near in those lower levels, and at night it actually migrates to near the surface as it follows the plankton that it eats, that also makes these migrations. Oh yes, and that's the other thing. This is one of the 3 species of sharks that feed on plankton, along with the whale shark and the basking shark. So yet another interesting way that this shark is different. So we're going to go now to that potato shape you made, and we're going to make sort of a longer sock-like end coming off upward and to the right, like this. Off the end, this with a rounded end, kind of like that. Okay. We're working on kind of the body of the shark now. Just roughly. Again, these are just guide shapes. Don't worry if they're not perfect. That's okay, because we're going to refine these afterwards. And then to continue with the body, I'm going to make an even longer, I don't know what we call this shape. It's kind of a long, slightly hooked, almost like the end of a banana, I guess. Sharks are very commonly have banana-like shapes in them. If you look at the body of a shark, a lot of them have this kind of bent, slender kind of shape, and so that's something that you see a lot in them. Not every species, but a lot of them. Then, of course, the tail. Now, the tail here is going to be a little bit weird. This shark is neat because it's got a long upper lobe to its tail, or otherwise known as a caudal fin. And so it's a lot like a thresher shark that way. Not quite as long, but pretty long anyway, and narrow. But we're going to make this tail in about 2 or 3 steps. First of all, we're going to make this kind of slanted rectangle shape. So it looks like this. Go to the back end of the shark, and whoops, and then you just kind of draw this sort of straight, 4 straight sides. Whoops. This. There, sort of a slanted rectangle. That doesn't look much like a shark's tail yet, but that basically just kind of borders where we want the tail to be constrained in this shape. Then the next shape will help us define the tail. So you go to the bottom of this rectangle, and you'll make this line that goes up partway in and then carries off toward the corner, the far corner. And just before you hit the corner there, make this little notch like that. So this shark has a very long upper lobe to its tail and a short lower lobe. This is something you see in a lot of slow swimming sharks, not the fast swimming ones like makos or thresher sharks. Well, no, actually, thresher sharks are a good example of the opposite. They have a very, very long tip, but they can swim pretty fast too. So most of the time, sharks with long upper lobes relative to their lower lobe are slower swimming. Not always, but that's a general rule. And this shark is also not just slower swimming, but it's also got a very flabby body. It's if it were to sit on land, it would just it would almost like flatten out. It would kind of ooze almost. It's not very rigid. It's soft. So an interesting sort of a bit about it that way. Okay, but that's its tail shape overall. And remember though that that's the sort of the flat part of the tail, but along that center of that upper lobe, the shark's spine continues away. So we're going to make that continue the body a little bit. This line coming up along that upper lobe, and then it tips at ends with a tip at the end there, and then we'll bring it back to the body like that. So that is sort of a bit of a thicker area in the tail where the spine would go, basically, where it would follow it out to that point. And so when you're finished with this, you can erase out some of these guidelines, and the ones that you'll want to erase out ultimately are ones like this line here. We won't need that. Don't worry about it right now, but you know, or if you're just doing it lightly, it won't matter if it's still there. Now we're going to go back to the front end of the shark, and we're going to start on the mouth. Now the mouth of this guy, we're going to show it open. And I'm going to show you afterwards the really, really neat way that it's hypothesized or thought to feed. This is different from the way that a basking shark feeds or a whale shark. Maybe more like a whale shark, but probably different. So we're going to start with making in the head of the shark this kind of, it's like part of an oval. If you go to the tip like that, and then you make a curved line that comes around like this, and starts to curve back and then stops like that. So like a bite out of that oval, that potato shape. We're going to take a bite out of the potato. That's pretty rough still, but we're going to refine this now. So there we help to define kind of the upper jaw. Now we're going to do the lower jaw. And we're going to go to the tip of this potato again on the outside and make a curved line curving in the other way, and going to meet that line that we just did, like that. Neat thing about this shark's mouth is that unlike most shark species, the mouth is not very underslung, which means that it's not like how, if this was a shark's head, the mouth is often found quite far back from the tip of the snout on the underside of the head. But in the megamouth, the mouth is almost at the very tip of the snout, which is really interesting. There aren't many sharks like that. The frilled shark is a good example of one that is. Now we're going to put in a couple of lines here to help define where the other side of the jaw is. So we're looking at one side of the shark, the left side of the shark, but the shark's jaws are visible inside of its mouth on the opposite side as well. Okay, so I'm going to make this little arched line along the upper jaw like this. Just a short little arc. Okay. And then similarly for the lower jaw, we're going to make a little arc or arced line like this. Like that. So still not looking much like a shark's mouth, but you'll see in a second how this works. Now we want to keep in mind that this shark, the mouth is very near the tip of the snout, but not quite there. There is a little bit of a snout above the above where the mouth is. So we're gonna draw that by making a connecting line between, like right like that. So what we have here is the mouth is actually that area with those double lines, almost like those long lemon shapes. And then this here is just the underside of the tip of the snout. We're gonna come back to the head in a bit, but for now we're gonna go and work on a couple of the fins. Now, the Megamouth has these really impressively long pectoral fins. The pectoral fins are those paired fins that are just behind the gill slits and are kind of equivalent to our arms as land-dwelling animals. And so we're gonna make a line behind, just behind that first potato shape we made. And it's gonna come like this. Gonna go toward the back of the shark. And then as you near that second shape's end, you'll turn up a bit like that. So it's kind of an angle, a single angle shape. And then the next line will come back down from that tip where you ended, and it'll start out as a bit of almost like a triangle from it, but then you'll turn and go kind of parallel to that first line and end there. And make one more line that comes out of that inner corner and curves a little bit like that. Now, this looks strange, but it's because the shark's fins are held out to the side. And we're looking at the shark mostly from the side, so we're seeing those fins sort of edge on. If you were to hold your hand in front of your face and look at the edge of your hand, that's kind of what we're seeing here. You don't have to do this, but I'm gonna make a quick little sketch on the side here to show you what the Megamouth's fin would look like if you were looking at it from above. It looks more like this. So that's kind of, this is where it would connect to the body, and then this is the fin. It has a very long fin, but what we're seeing here is that the fin is stretched out toward us, and the tip of it is actually turned up a little bit. That's what that sort of that weird little triangular shape is at the end. Okay, so that's the pectoral fin on our side of the shark, but it's got another pectoral fin on the opposite side of its body. We're going to show that we can only see the tip of it because most of it is behind the shark's body. But this tip, we're going to come from down below here near the end of the potato again, and this is a little bit curved here. Notice that it's wider than that fin that I drew up here, because again, we're seeing it a little bit more edge on, and so the fin appears to be more flattened out than it would be from above. But this way we can see the shark from a slightly more interesting angle than just straight from the side. Okay, now we're going to add, this shark has a pair of dorsal fins that are on the back of the shark, on the top of its body. Has two dorsal fins. The first dorsal fin happens about midway down the body. So you're going to make a lower triangle in this case, like this. Thing to keep in mind about this shark is that, remember I mentioned it's an interestingly shaped one, very unusual, very different from that shark that's behind me. The one that I mentioned is that's a blacktip reef shark. And it is actually the very first shark that I snorkeled with, so that was a really happy moment for me. That one's got a pretty tall dorsal fin. But Megamouths have a lower dorsal fin. It's triangular, but it's squashed down a bit lower. And so that's kind of what the first dorsal fin mostly looks like. The second dorsal fin is about halfway between the end of that first dorsal fin and the beginning of the tail. And it's a little bit smaller than the first dorsal fin, but it's similarly shaped, like a slightly smaller triangle, like that. Again, pretty low. This is, again, a feature of a lot of slower swimming sharks. A lot of the ones that live on the ocean bottom, like the cat sharks, have low fins, low dorsal fins. The smaller ones, they're not really that important for giving the shark a good control at high speed because it doesn't swim at high speed. So it's not that important for it to have these really, really well-developed fins. Now, there's a couple of other paired fins underneath the shark, the pelvic fins. These are the equivalent of kind of our legs. This is what would have evolved into legs from those fish that ultimately gave rise to land-dwelling animals. The first one is on our side of the shark, and this is also kind of a triangular one, about halfway between the pectoral fins and the tail, or a little bit closer to the pectoral fins, but it'll look like this. Small triangle like that. Very similar in shape to the dorsal fins from this angle. We're looking at this a little bit from the side, so this is going to be a little bit squashed again compared to if you were looking at it from above. If you were looking at it above, I'm going to draw a little view of it here. You don't have to do this. It would look something like this, but that's actually pretty similar anyway. It's just a little bit squashed. The second pelvic fin is the one next to that one on the opposite side of the shark's body, but these are closely set together. They're right next to each other underneath the shark's belly. So they're actually not going to be like the pectoral fins. You'll see more of this one than we did of that other pectoral fin that's on the opposite side of the shark's body. It looks like this. They actually meet sort of side by side at the back of these pelvic fins. They sit right side by side. So if you look at the shark's belly, looking up toward from the belly of the shark upward, they look kind of like this. There's one here, and then there's one like this, and then they basically just about meet. And then the front of the shark is that way, and those would be the pelvic fins. But we're looking at it from the side. Now there's a little tiny fin on the underside of the shark called the anal fin, and some sharks, a lot of sharks have this. Not all sharks do. Dogfish don't. Angel sharks don't. The saw sharks don't. The megamouth does, and it happens right here, right after the second dorsal fin, and it's also very similar shaped. It's a little triangle like that, but it's smaller, a little bit smaller than the second dorsal fin. So you can already start to see the overall shape of the shark coming together, and it is a very strange shaped shark. It's really long, but its head area is relatively swelled up or looks larger, and it kind of tapers down toward the back of the shark. And has this really long tail upper lobe, but small fins on top and very large pectoral fins. So interestingly shaped, very weird. There's no other shark with a shape like this. Now we're going to put the eye in place. And again, this shark has a very strange shaped head. So the eye is placed over here, just a little bit to the front of the back end of the mouth, and a little bit higher than halfway from the mouth level up to the top of the head from this angle. It's just a circle here. And it really does have circular shaped eyes. And they're neat because it can move those eyes within the eye socket, and they can actually turn them quite a bit down and hide the eyes, or the seeing parts of the eyes from view pretty well. And this is a protective strategy that a lot of sharks have. And some sharks, when they're biting their prey, they actually rotate their eyes in their sockets out of the way so that if the prey is flailing around, nothing hits the eye and damages it. So these guys can actually move their eyes quite well also in that socket. Now also it's got a nostril and a small spiracle. The spiracle is a hole behind the eye that is better developed in many sharks that live on the bottom. But a lot of these sharks that swim also have them. Spiracles help sharks that don't move, that sit on the bottom, to be able to breathe and keep water flowing over their gills when their mouth is on the bottom. But megamouths also have a little spiracle. The little spiracle happens about this position behind the eye. It's just a small dot here, very small. The nostril is near the tip of the snout, and it looks like this. You'd make a little round, tiny circle, and then there's actually a little flap of tissue in front of it that hangs down like that. And it's hard to see it there. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so that you can see it a little bit better. We're just going to move this here. So there you can see it. That's what it would look like. There's the nostril, and then the little flap that hangs down along the sort of the inside end of the nostril. Okay, and then when you're finished with this, this is another one of these lines out here that you're going to be able to erase, but don't worry about that for now. This one here, just putting lines through those because it will ultimately disappear. The gills of the shark. The megamouth, like most sharks that are alive today, has 5 gill slits. And these are, they end right basically where the pectoral fins begin. And then they go part of the way forward along the head. So the furthest back gill slit is right here, right at the front of that pectoral fin. And the very first gill slit is just a little bit back of halfway between that one and the spiracle. So it comes out here. It's a little longer than that last one, and it's a little bit curved, kind of like a crescent moon in a sense, but it's just a line. Then you make the middle gill slit between those two, and it's about halfway in between their sizes. And then there's 2 more gill slits between each of these 2. There's one in front, like that, and then one behind, like that. That's the easiest way to draw shark gill slits. Draw the first one and the last one, and then space one equally between those 2, and then equally between those last 2 sets, or very close to that. Sometimes, pay attention, some sharks have gill slits that change in the distance between them. And this one also a little bit. Often there's less space between the second last and the last gill slit than there is between the first gill slit and the second gill slit. So that happens a lot in sharks. And this is species specific. So different species, different types of sharks have different kinds of characteristics in their gill slits and how they're spaced. So that gives us most of what we need. I'm just going to zoom in again, to define the overall shape of the shark. What we're going to do now is we're going to shift to our darker colored pencil, or a heavier pencil, or ink if you have, let's say, a pen. We want to make these next lines heavier or more visible so that you can either erase out these guidelines we've done once you're finished, or just make them less visible. Now I'm going to switch my colors to black, and just to make this more easily visible to us. And I'm going to put it on a different layer, actually, because I can do that in digital media. And we're going to start with the head. So the kinds of details we're going to put in the head are already defined by a lot of the lines we have there. But we're going to clean this up so that we show where the lines are that we want actually to stay. So I'm going to start with the tip of the snout. And that is going to be here. Right there. And I'm going to draw a line backward from there. And oops, yeah, erase out a little bit of this. I kind of missed that. But just going to trace along the line you drew, all the way back, the first dorsal fin. Just follow the same line that you did with black now, or with darker color, and stop there. Okay. I'm just going to put the eye in place as well, since it's just sitting right there. See, I'm going to zoom in a little bit here, make it more visible. And once more. Okay. I'm going to make the eye a circle there. And you know what? I'm going to show the eye partly rotated. So I mentioned that they can rotate their eyes downward. So there's a part of the eye that is kind of like the part that has the muscular sort of iris, the part that changes the shape of the pupil. That's defined by this line here. And then there's actually a pupil, which is that hole, black hole in our eye through which the light actually enters. And that is actually down here in this guy. It looks like he's looking downward, but he's just rotating his eyes. Or well, her eyes actually, because this one is a female shark based on the shape of the fins. The spiracle, you can put a little black spot there as well that we did, exactly like before. And same with the nostril, since we've got that in place here already and we have the shape pretty well defined. There's a nice nostril, and then there's that little flap of tissue like that. Now, for the snout, here's the neat thing about the megamouth. Again, remember, it has a very short little snout in front of the mouth. So we're going to go down from where we started with that black pen like this. And so it's actually a wee bit blunt, the nose, but it's pretty close to that. And follow that line further back toward the back, to the corner of, toward the corner of the mouth, but stop before you get to the end of that little arc. We're going to make a little line that joins these two lines like that. What we're seeing there is the upper jaw on the other side of the animal from the inside. So we're actually be able to look a little bit into its mouth. So its mouth is a little bit open here. It's on its way to opening its mouth to engulf some plankton. And they have the neatest jaws, the way that they function. Now, this has never actually been seen before in action. It's, as far as I know, it's feeding strategy. But there are ideas about how they likely feed based on studying the jaws of individuals that have been captured. And I'll show you that in a second. But we're going to finish up the mouth here, and I'm going to draw this line that's on our side of the upper jaw, just like we had before. But now pay attention. As soon as we cross that corner of the mouth, go a little ways down and then stop like that. A little bit of a hook. Megamouths have these this upper jaw that kind of overlaps the lower jaw. And so it has this, not quite dimples, but it's got these lines coming down from the mouth. If I were to force my mouth like that, there would be lines coming down, and it stops at this kind of a corner like that. And then we're going to draw the lower jaw. We're going to start from that point where that lower jaw meets that upper jaw and go forward from there to the tip of the mouth. This. Then at the tip of the mouth, we're going to go back along that line that joins it sort of upward, but a little bit of a notch here. Up, tiny bit up, and then back a wee bit down. There's a tiny bit of a corner there. It goes back to meet the corner of the mouth like that. Okay. And then the lower jaw, the chin of the shark. This is another neat thing about Megamouth. It's got a really, really hefty, large lower jaw and a very large chin for a shark. Most sharks don't have much of a chin. If you look at that blacktip reef shark behind me, you can't even really see the lower jaw very well from this angle. It's just hidden underneath the shark. But the Megamouth has this beautiful, big, rounded lower jaw. So it looks like this. If you start from that tip, just follow along the line that we made, and I'm gonna go and stop there for now. Okay. I want to pay special attention here to the head. This is where all the interesting action takes place, and because that's where a lot of the image of the shark are drawn incorrectly. Let's correct that and pay attention to the way this works. This is such a neat looking animal, so I get excited about this. It has teeth, got lots of teeth, like 50 rows on top, like 75 rows of teeth in the bottom, but they're tiny. They're about that big. They're about as big as your smallest fingernail, basically, really tiny. And they're found on these kind of, these sort of flat areas on both sides of the jaw. It looks like this. On the lower jaw, there's this jaw line parallel to that outer line that you drew. And then you can represent the teeth. So that's kind of a flat area on the inside of the jaw. You represent the teeth by little dots like this. And they're in rows. So each of these dots represents a tooth. Basically, just draw a bunch of dotted lines coming down across that little flat area you drew. And that represents all the tiny, tiny teeth. It doesn't use its teeth to grab prey. Basically, it just engulfs its prey with its mouth and then filters out the water through its gill slits. And if you look at the gills from the inside of the shark's mouth, you see that those gills, the gill arches, the cartilage that holds the gills up, has these projections on it called gill rakers, and those intermesh with each other and help to filter out any tiny fish or small plankton from the water before the water exits through the gills. So that's what it swallows then. It's those little bits of food that it captures. So that's on our side of the shark and lower jaw. Now the upper jaw is hiding a lot of the teeth on our side, but you can see them on the other side. So it's kind of a weird, complicated shape. So on the other side of the of the upper jaw, we're going to draw a line like this. Parallel again, follows along the jawline that we drew, and then it stops kind of like that. This is the same thing as we drew with holding all those teeth on the lower jaw, but now it's on the upper jaw. But the way they are set up is that on the lower jaw, they kind of slant outward a little bit like this. But on the upper jaw, they also slant like this. So they kind of almost mesh together. But that means that when you're looking at the shark from a little bit below, you can see the one on the other side on the top jaw, but you can only see the one on your side on the lower jaw. So they're similar angle. Now you can draw the teeth in with little dots in a similar way we did with the lower jaw, like this. And there again, they're in rows here. Tiny, tiny teeth in rows, row upon row of tiny teeth, about 50 rows of them. Well, we're gonna draw some of the rows, but lots and lots of little teeth. But again, it doesn't use them to grab prey. But you can't really see very well the teeth on our side. We can draw a little bit of that tooth row, or that sort of plate of teeth here. Just a little bit is visible, like that, on our side. And the neat thing about the lower jaw is that, and this is what a lot of artwork doesn't quite get right, is that this area right here, there's this bit of a notch. It goes up and then it goes back down, and then those teeth on the other side, you can't really see them, but they're, you know, if I were to draw in little dots, it would be kind of like along this end. And then up here on the upper jaw, there's also a little bit of a notch here. And so if you look at the shark from the front, it's the neatest looking thing. So here's a view of the shark from the front, sort of like you're looking at its face. So that's the shark's body. And then the nostrils, right? Because they're paired. There's one here and there's one here. The eyes would be about here. We're looking at it from the front. And here's the mouth. Or actually, look, the tip of the snout first, right? And then the mouth goes like this. It starts out back here. And then it comes forward. And there's a wee bit of a notch downward. And then it goes to the other side. Comes down. And then the lower jaw does this, comes like this, and then there's, if its mouth is closed, this is what happens. That little notch in the front, those two kind of overlap. And then those tooth rows are all along the side here. And you can only see the bottom ones when its mouth is closed like this. So it's the neatest looking animal. It's got the little notches in the front. This is something that you learn if you look at it really closely. The other thing is there's a couple of little lines that we can draw on the head that help to define some of the grooves. So there's a wee bit of a line, a dotted line under the eye like this. There's a bit of a groove there, or a bit of a corner. This is where some of its head is strangely shaped, this little angle there. There's a little bit of an angular groove behind the spherical like that. And now the bottom jaw, there's a couple of neat things here. The bottom jaw has these beautiful spots, dark spots. You can draw little spots like this. Its color pattern, the color pattern of this shark is, it's kind of a dark gray overall, and then underside is white. In older animals, it's less obviously white, but you can see that especially under the fins. And one other important thing here, under the snout, just above the upper lip, there's this line of bright white. And so if we were to draw that, we draw kind of a dotted line at the tip here, just above the mouth, like that. It comes backward like this. And so that area, that little line of stuff underneath there, that's a bright white band. And it's still not really known well. Whoops, looks like I accidentally drew a sharp line here. It should have been. It's not quite known very well how it uses these reflective areas. At one time, it was thought that there would be glowing material inside of its mouth or on this band. It's not so clear anymore if that's really glowing or bioluminescent. It could be that it's just reflective. It may be that this white lip stripe is used to signal to each other for sharks. It's not fully known yet. This animal doesn't have a lot known about it yet. So it's really neat though. These are some of the things that people are just still learning about it. Now we're just gonna draw the gills. We already drew those, and so we're just gonna trace those out exactly the same way as we did. Those ones are easy. And the same thing with this pectoral fin on our side. I'm going to start with the bottom and just trace along that line. Go back up, and then that's the tip that is sort of turned upward. I'm actually going to make the line kind of a little bit lighter along this front edge, and then connect the back end that we're seeing a little bit of the top there. Okay. Oh, one last thing about the head here. One of the characteristics on the underside of the upper jaw, like if I were to look at the area where I have some of my whiskers on top, there's a little bit of a few sort of creases that look like this. You can add those in. Little wrinkles that happen like that. Something that you can see on a lot of the sharks' individuals. Now, I'm gonna move this over. We're gonna put in the other fins. The dorsal fins are very close to what we had already, but there's a slight bit of difference. So if you continue from the back of the shark, you go up toward the curve, up toward the top of the dorsal fin, and there's a tiny, tiny bit of a curve on the way down, like that. So it curves a little bit. And actually, you can also add, if you want, there's a white edge to this fin on the back edge. So you can make a dotted line, let's say. I'm going to add that other pectoral fin, which is the paired fin that's just behind the gill slits, but on the other side of the shark. We just trace over exactly how we did it before. Oops, I went out a little bit wide, so I'm just going to erase this out a little bit. Do that line again there. That. And these ones also have kind of a whitish margin. Actually, on the underside, they're white, so you don't even have to make a whitish margin on this one. Instead, because this shark's fins underneath are white, there's actually a bit of a dark leading edge. So there's a bit of a margin under the front edge of these fins that is dark. And the rest of the fin underneath is white. We are going to make the second dorsal fin now, that little triangle on top. And it's the same shape basically as the first dorsal fin. It's up and to that corner, and then there's a little bit of a curve on the back end of it. Also a little bit of a white edge in the back. You can finish off the back of the shark between the dorsal fins, same line that we did before, and then go from that second dorsal fin. You can actually give it a little bit of a notch at the back, heading a little bit forward, because the trailing edge, the back edge of these dorsal fins isn't connected fully to the body. There's a little bit of a flap. Now you can go and finish off the back of the shark, the dorsal side or the upper side from the back of that second dorsal fin right to the tail fin, and continue along the outer margin of the tail fin or the caudal fin right up to the tip, just like we did before. And pay attention to the fact that this is a tip now here. We're going to continue back along this little flap and then down along the rear margin of that fin, and then to the corner of the lower lobe, continue along it, and then forward from there, the front edge of the lower lobe of this tail fin or caudal fin, right to where it meets the body. You can add a dotted line or a very light line along that part where I mentioned the spine of the shark continues, the body of the shark continues through the tail fin. Because it's not really a really heavy line there. It's just kind of a little bit of a thicker area. And now, since we're at the back end of the shark, we can continue forward along the bottom of the body toward that little anal fin. And like the dorsal fins, this little fin, this anal fin has a trailing edge that is a little bit disconnected from the body. So we'll make a little bit of a notch under it like that, and then follow it forward. It's a tiny bit of a hook at the tip like that, and then back down toward the body. Let me move this a little bit over. All we have left now is the bottom of the body and that paired pelvic fins. So I'm actually going to start here from the front, and you can draw a line across where it meets where the pectoral fin on the far side falls behind the body and continue along the body of the shark. Backward, like this, smoothly, until we hit the pelvic fins, and I'll stop there. Actually, I'll stop at the pelvic fin that's on our side. And I'm going to draw the pelvic fin on our side. Again, it's a triangle, very much like what we did. Go to the back, and then again, there's a bit of a notch here, a little bit of a flap, because the trailing edge of the pelvic fins, again, is not connected to the body directly. And then at the back end of that pelvic fin, I'll draw the body and connect it to the front edge of that little anal fin that we just drew before. One more fin is left, is that paired pelvic fin underneath the body of the shark, and we're just going to follow that line that we drew before, pretty much exactly like we did, and stop it when we hit the pelvic fin on our side. Just one more last thing we really need to add to the shark is those gills. I'm going to go to the front of the shark then. Gills are pretty small, actually, when you compare it. Remember we did the basking shark a few weeks ago? That had these enormously long gill slits, and a lot of water can go through those. But this shark doesn't feed the same way. It doesn't have its mouth always open and not always filtering the water out. It has relatively small gill slits, but you can still see a little bit of the gill arches underneath the body of the shark, underneath the skin, and there's a little bit of little grooves that happen, and it looks kind of like this. So you got to draw light lines here. You go from just beyond the upper edge of these gill slits. There's little lines that go up like this that kind of follow the gill slits but slant forward. Just light lines, because these are not really sharp lines. They're just little visible grooves that change in how they're visible depending on how the shark is moving. And underneath the gills, this similar thing happens. Small light lines going from near where the gill slits end on the bottom, slanting forward, just a little bit. Okay. Well, and then the last thing we want to add to it is actually a lateral line. Now, remember that sharks can sense motion underwater. The vibrations that fish make in the water send these little pulses of vibration. The sharks can feel those through this fluid-filled special organ on the side of their body called the lateral line. And it looks like this. It starts out here near, above and behind the gill slits, and we're just going to go and draw it along the upper half of the body, back toward the tail, and we're going to end it right here about where the tail starts out. And that's basically this long line of fluid-filled special tissue that reacts to pulses in the water, and you can sense the movement of prey. Now, I mentioned that these guys have a really neat way of feeding. Those jaws are really flexible. They can jump forward, basically. So if you were to look at a shark, that this has not been seen in feeding in the wild, but if it's opening its mouth really wide, I'm drawing a little thing on the side here, jaws open wide like this, and then what is hypothesized to happen is that the upper jaw then kind of almost like slides out from the shark's head skin in a way. It slides forward, and then the lower jaw sort of jumps forward, and you get this bit of a groove happen here toward the gills as it's closing its mouth. And then basically, one step further, with the mouth closed, it looks almost like it has a beak, kind of. This is a little bit exaggerated, but not by much. And so it would snap shut on a huge volume of water containing plankton and maybe small fish. And then this massively expanded area of its head would slowly squeeze the water out through the gill slits and then trap all those little food particles on the gill rakers on the inside of the gills until the head is back down to normal size again. And then the jaws would slide back in toward the shark. I kind of illustrated this in a book. Maybe I'll show you afterwards, but oh yeah, it's not showing up very well here. Anyway, there are illustrations of this in various books, but that gives us an idea of what's thought about how they feed. So our shark is basically ready now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to reduce the brightness of those guidelines, if the red ones. If you want, you can partly erase them out. Be careful not to erase the final lines you made. But if I were to reduce the brightness of those guidelines, here's what we get. We get finished shark. We get basically a finished picture of a megamouth shark, one of the strangest shaped sharks in the world. I love these guys. They're just really interesting. So that's our shark. And congratulations, you've drawn a megamouth shark. And it's a wonderful example of a shark that shows how much of the ocean is left to be discovered still, and how important it is for us to protect the areas that we haven't seen even, because who knows what's down there still. So many amazing species. Every one of these dives can bring up new species practically. And many of them see sharks, some of them see new shark species. So there we go.
Amazing. And I think, you guys that have watched along, it's just, having done a few of these, how diverse the shapes are, which is really incredible, because I think a lot of times people think of sharks and they think of that white shark or mako, the pointed snout, and they've got to have that specific sharky look. But actually, it's incredible to look at species like this and just see how different they actually are, which is amazing.
Really are.
Yeah, and just absolutely incredible. So I know we ran over a little bit, guys.
Oh, did we? Oh, we did. Sorry.
No, you're fine. No, because I just wanted to say thank you guys to everyone who stayed on with the tech stuff at the beginning. But yeah, thank you so much. So just a couple of questions. Being that it is World Oceans Day, what advice do you give to students or people watching? What can they do no matter where they live? How can they help the oceans?
Oh, that's an excellent question, and it's so important today. There's different things you can do to help the oceans, even if you don't live near the ocean. I'm lucky, and you're lucky that we live near the ocean, but if you're not near the ocean, there's a couple of things. One, we need to reduce the kinds of things that are being thrown into the ocean, because a lot of, like for example, single-use plastics are ending up in the ocean, and a lot of fish, and especially filter-feeding fish like the megamouth, catch this plastic and junk, and it clogs up their guts, and that actually kills them a lot of the time. So try to avoid using single-use plastic as much as you can. That helps a lot. The other thing is that fishing is a major pressure on many marine ecosystems. So if you eat fish, look for the most carefully regulated fisheries that do as little harm as possible. I try to avoid eating fish as much as I can, especially net-caught fish. The nets are a horribly damaging way, because they catch many species that aren't even intended to be caught. So a lot of sharks get caught in nets, a lot of dolphins do as well, many other fish as well. So I avoid all net-caught fish or anything that's dredged from the bottom for similar reasons. Also, you can help to, there's shoreline cleanups that you can take part in that remove a lot of the garbage that piles up that might otherwise end up in the ocean. You can also help out with organizations that help the oceans, either that help to rehabilitate wildlife that gets stuck, or like Sharks for Kids, that helps conservation through spreading awareness about the ocean. These are really important things you can do. Talk to your friends, get them interested in the ocean, tell them about the challenges that the ocean has. These are all many different things that you can do, and it's just some of them that can definitely make a big difference if we all did them, even if a large proportion of us did them.
Yeah, and I think sometimes people, it seems overwhelming, and there's so many things and so many issues and challenges, but there's simple actions that one at a time. One simple action, if every person did that, it adds up pretty quickly. And,
oh yeah.
Yeah, and so it's really important to, remember, don't get overwhelmed. Yes, there are environmental issues everywhere, but yeah, it's super important to remember that choosing a metal or bamboo straw, bringing your own water bottle, your own grocery bag, things like that. They might not seem like a big deal, really are, and it adds up and it reduces the amount of plastic. Plus you could get all of those things with sharks designed on them too. So even very cool, right? And make it even better.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like my shark mug.
Exactly. One question we're going to finish with, because I think that was a really great answer, especially with the day, and really we should celebrate the oceans every day. And I know we're trying to, get students to understand these animals and promote ocean awareness and education. But if you could dive or swim with one shark right now, what would it be? I know that's a tough one.
Oh, that would be a tough one. So many I want to swim with. I mean, I got to swim with this guy back here, which was really fun, but I love the really weird, wonky ones. And so one that we have around where I live in Vancouver, not far from us, are six-gill sharks. And they are usually deeper water sharks, but sometimes at night they come closer to the surface. I would love to dive with six-gill sharks. They're huge. They're enormous. They're some of the biggest sharks out there. They can grow to, what is it, like close to 30 feet long, I think. Some of them are there, yeah. Beautiful. They're really ancient looking too. They've got one dorsal fin. They've got 6 gills. They're just beautiful deep water sharks. I'd love to swim with those ones, but I'd love to swim with any shark. That's an example of one. Yeah, I think 6 gills, and I think it's just really animals that we're not super familiar with. I know for me, like the 6 gills, and having seen the webinar where they tagged one submarine, and just I've had friends that have caught and tagged and working with them, and just one of them said the most shocking part of it was the sheer size. Like you just everyone thinks of whale sharks and white sharks and basking sharks as the big animals, and they don't think that there's a lot of other species that, not many, because sharks are relatively small overall, but there are still some larger species out there that aren't necessarily the well-known sort of getting the airtime on the TV shows. Yeah. So I think, hopefully one thing I would say to students is take the time today to learn about a species that you haven't heard of before. Do some research, maybe check out and explore a little bit more about this megamouth shark, because it's super rare, pretty incredible, and again, a reminder of why we want to take such good care of our oceans, because there's so much we're still left to explore and learn and protect. And so much that we depend on, not just in terms of eating, but the oxygen that we breathe, a lot of that comes from the ocean as well. I mean, we literally require the ocean for survival. Yeah, absolutely. So, well, I want to thank everyone who joined us today. And again, Julius, thank you so much for sharing your amazing artwork with us. Guys, stay tuned as well. You can watch this on the YouTube channel. It'll be up there shortly. So if you missed something, you want to try it again. Also, we're going to have a coloring sheet featuring this species that's going to be up on the website. And so dive in, learn a little bit more. Thank you, everyone, and happy World Oceans Day. Thank you, guys. Hey, thank you very much for having me, and happy World Oceans Day. Absolutely. Thank you. Take care.